The first item on the agenda, are there any bill introductions this morning? All right, seeing none, I'll go ahead and move on to the next item, and that is opening the hearing on House Bill 2472, which is authorizing the governor to submit a budget report to the legislature that increases the total expenditures for the ensuing fiscal year by not more than 2% of the total expenditures from the immediately preceding fiscal year. So to give us a briefing on House Bill 2472, I'll now turn it over to Jill Walters, the First Assistant Revisor with the Office of the Revisor of Statutes. Jill.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Under current law, which is 75-3711, and just for your reference, if you have the bill, the entire statute is printed in the bill. So if you're looking for more detail on this, this is the statute that we are referring to and talking about right now, and all the detail is in that statute. It establishes the requirements for the governor's budget report. The report is to be in 3 parts. It's a budget message, including recommendations for fiscal policy for the state government for the current fiscal year and for the ensuing fiscal year. It describes important features of the budget plan, and then does other factors which talk about current income and anticipated income. And so the budget is, that would be the budget message. A detailed budget estimate of each fiscal year is part 2, and that is to include both the expenditures and the revenues, and showing the agency requests and the governor recommendations. And this part also is supposed to include statements on bonded indebtedness. And then part 3 of the bill is the budget, of the budget report is the bill. So they're called legislative measures that the governor presents, and then of course then that's the basis of your budget bill from where you start and make changes to the governor's rec, and that's what you guys do. So what this bill would do, it would provide that commencing with fiscal year 2026, the governor shall submit a detailed budget plan for the ensuing fiscal year that increases the total amount of monies authorized to be expended or transferred by demand transfer from SGF during the ensuing fiscal year by not more than 2% of the total amount of monies authorized to be expended or transferred by demand transfer from the state general fund during the immediately preceding fiscal year. And so sort of to put it into a real life, if this would pass, then during the next legislative session, so the session of 2025, when the governor presents the 2026 budget, the governor would submit a budget that increases spending in 26 by not more than the authorized expenditures from SGF for 25. And then, of course, that would just keep continuing. But that would be what would happen next year. So I'll be pleased to stand for any questions.
Committee, are there any questions for Jill? All right, seeing none. Thank you, Jill.
Thank you, sir.
The first individual that we have as a proponent is going to be the ranking member on the Appropriations Committee, Representative Helgerson. Representative.
Thank you very much. If you can't hear me, let me know. You know, this is such a radical proposal. 2% is all we're going to allow the governor to put into her or his budget as an increase. Why? There's a question about constitutionality. There's a question about if that's what's right. What happens if there's an emergency? But I want to take you back a little bit about how the things have changed over the years. First of all, when I began this process in the 1980s, Don Maney was the ranking Democrat, and he told me that one of my first lessons was our process is we spend all the money we can. When we run out, we raise taxes, we go through the process again. And that's how we've acted for the many, many years with some changes. We put in, after several cycles of this, we put in the 7.5 inning balance law. But we put that in with the idea that that'll give us an inning balance as opposed to, which had been historic, just barely getting $100 million. Can you imagine ending the state's budget with $100 million? And with a regular certificates of indebtedness automatically being issued every year. That's the financial situation we had in the 80s and going into the 90s. We looked at constitutional amendments that other states have, even, I think some of them have implemented, where it requires the government only spend so much more money and it's put into the Constitution or is only proposed. We balked at this process because we didn't think, myself included, that that kind of restriction is appropriate or necessary. It should be up to the legislature to make a determination on whether or not we have funds available and whether, how they're spent, and not putting into the Constitution and locking us in. We also kicked around ideas of having a budget process that was one for the Democrats, one for the Republicans. That was quickly rejected by most of us because we didn't think that we all like the idea of an independent, objective process. But the one thing we haven't had a situation that this tries to address is we are continually overspending the money that we have coming in. When I say that, look at how we've had additional money over the last several years and the state general fund increases. It's not unheard of to have a 10, 12, 13% increase in the state general fund. And we have been fortunate enough that those resources have come in to the state to give us that opportunity. You know, if you go back and look at the budget profiles that then Speaker and I proposed and handed out on a regular basis, before COVID hit, we were actually going to have a financial crisis in that we didn't have the funds to take care of our state budget. But the influx of money that came in from the federal government gave us a one-time surplus. And I say that. We've never had the surplus that we've had until this last few years. And we have decided, and the governor has decided, that we are going to spend most or all partially paying down debt, partially spending as one-time expenditures, but it is going to put us in the same ritual of spending money and spending all of it to the point where we have to raise taxes again. I advocate, and a few states have adopted this philosophy, that we spend the money that we bring in every year and we try to hold to that philosophy. We are all good-hearted people. I know all of you. I know all of you would do whichever you could for those that are needy, and we quite often do. But there's also the other side that if we don't have the money available that we have to have, and we only respond to some restrictions. A 2% budget increase tells us that the governor, we can almost anticipate that our revenues every year will be 2% or maybe a little bit above, maybe a little bit below. But with the interest that we have, it'll keep us pretty close to that income that we have. We're telling the state to do exactly what we have asked most citizens, and that is you live within your budget. So this 2%, I know I've heard already that the sky is falling. We will not be able to do the new school finance. And by the way, we have to do a new school finance formula in a couple years. That we will not have the funds available for it. We may not. But what we have to do is make sure that we are spending the money we have and not spending dollars that we think we might have. I said on the House floor recently that the tax bill that was proposed by my Republican colleagues was not financially solvent in the out years. And if you look at the budget proposal, it goes below the 7.5% ending balance requirement in the out years with very little increases. Also, if you look at the governor's proposal, it goes below that amount too. We so often look at an individual financial proposal, but we don't look at the long-term financial reality of whether or not we're going to have the funds available. This bill does not end the world. It says the governor puts conservative budget together, a 2%. Historically, we have required our agents to put together what was known as the ABC budgets. A for austere, B for basic, and C for wish list. That's what we used to ask the agencies to put together to submit to the governor's office, and then the governor would recommend what we have. I am asking the governor, in a collaborative way, put together what we have to have just to sustain government. Then put the options that you like to have on top of that. Now, some people may say, well, you're requiring them never to fulfill the constitutional obligations that we may have with the schools. No. We have a situation where, even though this is in the statute, quite often the governor's office will submit changes in the budget that are not in concert with present law. We have had governors in the past that added in sales taxes and said, this is my budget with a sales tax increase, even though it says in statute you can't use it. You cannot use funds that are projected to occur. We have Medicaid expansion money that is built into this year's budget, even though it takes an act of the legislature to do that. It is not a document that has to be locked in. It is a document that breathes. But it also has to breathe so that it gives us what we need. And too often we look at the individual budget and not in the overall scheme of things. We don't look at what it's going to do in 3 years or 4 years. And that is our problem now, and I'm trying to trying to address it. I think that kind of covers it, Mr. Chairman, and I'd be happy to answer any questions now or later.
All right, thank you, Mr. Ranking Member. Are there any questions for the Ranking Member? Representative Francis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Representative, I appreciate the years that you've fought this battle, and I know sometimes it probably feels like you're tilting at windmills. But one of the thoughts I had, you know, I never liked hard caps like the 2%. You know, sometimes inflation is a problem. And I've thought about this a lot, never with the ability to introduce a bill like this or wanted to take the shots for introducing a bill like this. But what are your thoughts about delegating this cap, not so much to a hard 2% cap, but like, for instance, letting the Legislative Budget Committee in the off-season set that cap prior to the development of the budgets? Do you feel like that's the same, we're going to run into the same problem that we already have?
Representative Helgerson.
I'm going to answer a little bit rounded way, and I apologize. I had a ranking high official in the Democrats tell me recently that we should use the emergency funds that we've accumulated, and it is emergency to put the money into special ed. That we should take that $1.7, $1.8 billion and the interest that's coming from it, and we should use it to fully fund special ed because that is an emergency and we should take care of it. That individual and I disagree because they don't have quite often the experience of dealing with budgets and what really is an emergency if you don't have money for funds for schools and putting on an additional program. This is not something I'm going to die over on a 2%. What I am going to die over is the idea that we need to develop a process for legislative discussion of saying, we want to have a more conservative budget, at least provided to us. I think the budget director came before us when the briefing and said, state general fund spending went up 2.2%. That was great. They, though, had taken away $1.2 billion and classified it, for the first time I've ever seen this done in 40 years, the FMAP money, and said, this is one-time money. I applaud the inventiveness of the secretary, but, you know, we break down so often and say, this is the Democrat plan, or this is the Republican plan, and this is how we can get around you, or how I can use this against you. If I sat down with the secretary, or if I sat down with the speaker or the chairman, I bet we could point out that say, both tax plans are going to be financially disastrous if we follow them through, if we have the same revenue. So how do we correct this process so that we have a frank, honest discussion about a budget? I'm not wed to the 2% by any means. I believe that there are opportunities for the Budget Committee, or for this full committee, or for the legislature to come together and say, let's have a little bit more realistic budget. You know, let's save some of that $1.2 billion of one-time money as opposed to being spent, but use that as additional dollars in the state general fund coffers so that we move ahead with some cushion when we start to redo school finance. You know, that's what scares me, is we're not going to have the cushion. We're going to have the emergency fund. Those kind of conversations have to be fostered some way. And this bill is trying to foster a discussion between the executive branch and the legislative branch, and between the Democrats and the Republicans. And you're right, it is kind of lonely.
Representative Owens.
You're not alone, sir. You're not alone. We're here for you. Thank you.
Representative Estes.
Speak for yourself. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate you initiating this discussion, because I'm just a sophomore, so when I came in and learned the process, I was kind of shocked that I feel like we don't get enough time to understand the budgets. We get presented something in January, and we're waiting for things to get printed, and we dive right in, and our timeline also doesn't allow for accountability. We don't really have a sense of, once we've sent the money over, where did it go? We get a superficial report on that. But I do have a question for you. What are your thoughts about tying inflation to your cap?
Representative Helgerson.
I think that's worthy of a longer discussion. I think it's very appropriate. You know, again, I underline, this is not something that's locked in stone. What is locked in stone is there has to be a way of furthering the conversations among all the branches.
Thank you.
Any further questions for the ranking member? Representative Corbett.
Thank you, Chairman. I kind of somewhat agree with the representative from Wichita. Whatever we're doing in this building is not making this state grow at any level. People are leaving, and they're leaving a lot of reasons is just taxes. And it's hard to find a day up here like in your budget. You go through $1 billion worth of budgets in 4 days or whatever. But I think the taxpayers just deserve a little more bang for their buck and maybe a little less spending, because it seems like this building is kind of on a like tax cocaine. It thrives on tax dollars, and I think the people at home are tired of being the payer.
Representative Carlin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is just a question. I tried to get the answer, but I missed it if you said it, Representative. Can the legislature then increase the budget during this process? The governor brings us the 2%, and then we can make adjustments as we always do. Or are we tied by the same 2%?
Representative Helgerson.
Understand. The budget says that the governor should submit something of 2%. But there are so many holes in that statement that they can put whatever they want in it. And quite often, over the last 40 years, governors and secretaries of administration or budget directors have done that. And the legislature, and I'll tell you right off, I am more guilty than anybody else of eliminating the 7.5% ending balance law. Of half a dozen of the changes or the statutes that have been in place, I have figured out ways to get around it. And the current budget director I know will get around it however they need to put a budget together that they feel. Or the governor will say, ideally, the governor budget would say simply, this is with only 2% or with only this amount, these are the core services. But I need to do a new hospital, such and such, or I need to pay the employees such and such. And they'd say it right up front, and then this group, this board of directors, if you want to look at it, would say, that's a high priority. We don't mind going above the 2% for that. So yes, it's in statute, but it's not in statute, if you might say. There's so many ways around it.
Like the notwithstanding
Mr. Chair, if I might,
Like the notwithstanding language that I used 40 years ago.
I'm not, excuse me, I'm not suggesting that we would try to get around it. I want to know if this is just the governor's recommendation or if we have to follow it. That's simple, yes or no.
It's the governor.
Representative Helgerson.
It's the governor's recommendation. We don't have to follow it.
Any further questions for the ranking member? Representative Ballard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Does this mean that if she does 2%, and I'll just use social services budget, as you know, we're always coming with the largest budget because that's where they are, and we give X amount of dollars, does that mean that's an automatic, I'll pull it out because somebody said you're over that 2%?
Representative Helgerson.
Nothing is automatic, but it's like a pause. You see that line, that arbitrary line, and you have to make sure that your arguments are good. One thing I've seen that's happened in the budget process, how often do we ask the agencies, how can we economize in order to take care of this other program? Not that you shouldn't, but this is a guideline, and nothing would stop you from putting whatever dollars you feel are appropriate and putting the budget together.
Man,
Representative Ballard.
the concern I have is not only are you tying the governor's hands, but you're going to tie each member on a committee's hands too, in terms of what it is. Even though you say it's a guideline, a lot of people look at guidelines differently, and I would have a little bit of concern with that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Estes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So if I want to understand you correctly, you're not saying it's an across the board, everything gets held. The governor, a governor can still prioritize and say, we need to increase 5% here, but I'm going to decrease certain percentage here so that at the end of that governor's process, their overall number is 2%.
Representative Helgerson.
That's correct.
Any further questions for the ranking member? All right, seeing none. I'm not showing anybody else that wishes to testify as a proponent in regards to House Bill 2472. So if there is somebody that wishes to testify as a proponent, here's your chance. Seeing none, we do have opponent testimony by Timothy Graham, Director of the Government Relations and Legislative Affairs for the Kansas National Education Association. That is written only. So if there's anybody else that wishes to address the committee as an opponent, here's your chance. And then for neutral testimony, we have written only testimony from Spencer Duncan, from the Government Affairs Director with the League of Kansas Municipalities. So if there's anybody else that wishes to address the committee as neutral testimony, here's your chance. If not, I'm going to close the hearing on House Bill 2472. All right, Committee, we're going to move on to final action on two bills. The first is going to be Senate Bill 195, and that is authorizing the Children's Cabinet to form a 501c3 for fundraising for the Dolly Parton Imagination Library book gifting program. As you recall, we did have this in the budget bill because we had our version in the House that passed out of this committee, and I believe it was on the consent calendar. It passed out of the House, went to the Senate. They had their version. It passed out, but neither bill actually passed both chambers. So this is the Senate's version. I believe there are no real changes from when we had the hearing on this particular bill. And this actually just codifies that the Children's Cabinet can set up a 501c3. We did that in the budget bill, but this just allows it for year after year after year. So I would actually make the motion to pass out Senate Bill 195 favorably for passage. Is there a second? Second by Representative Helgerson. Any discussion in regards to Senate Bill 195? Seeing none, I will move my motion. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Next, we will move on to final action on House Bill 2491, which is abolishing the Law Enforcement Training Center Fund, and all liabilities of such fund are transferred and imposed on the State General Fund. Monies previously credited to such fund shall be credited to the State General Fund. We have a motion to pass this bill out of committee. Representative Owens.
I move that we pass House Bill 2491 out favorably.
Committee, you've heard the motion. Is there a second? Seconded by Representative Turk. Discussion on the motion. Seeing none, Representative Owens, you may close.
I close.
All right, committee, you've heard the motion. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Next, we'll move on to the budget report outs. And so I'll now turn it over to Chairman Howe with the Higher Education Budget Committee. And I believe we do have a request to start with the Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board because they do have to get up to Senate Ways and Means. So Representative Howe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the accommodation and change of schedule. So the Behavioral Science Regulatory Board will start on their fiscal year 24 request. The agency estimate requests a revised estimate of $1.2 million, all from the BSRB fee fund, and expenditures and 11.5 FTE positions in fiscal year 24. This is the same amount as approved by the 23 legislature. While the agency does not request an increase to its expenditure limitation, the agency's estimate does include changes between categories of expenditure within the amount approved by the 2023 legislature. The revised estimate includes an increase of $3,228 in salaries and wages due to increases in fringe benefits, and an increase of $1,375 in commodities for office supplies for 2 new licensing specialists approved by the 2023 legislature. These increases are offset by an estimated decrease of $3,163 in contractual services attributable to a decrease in legal services and other decreased expenditures. The governor concurs with the agency's revised estimate in fiscal year 24. The Higher Ed Budget Committee concurred with the governor's budget recommendation for fiscal year 24 with the following notation: to encourage the Behavioral Science Regulatory Board to consider utilizing their ending balance to reduce licensure fees and report their plan back to the Higher Education Budget Committee by February 29th of this year. I'll stand for questions, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you, Chairman Howe. Committee, are there any questions in regards to fiscal year 2024? Seeing none, you may move on to 2025.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The agency requests a revised estimate of $1.2 million, all from the BSRB fee fund, and expenditures and 11.5 FTE positions for fiscal year 25. This is an increase of $22,909, or 2% above the fiscal year 2024 revised estimate, and $25,776, or 2.2% above the amount approved by the 23 legislature. This increase is primarily to account for an increase in expenditure limitation that was inadvertently omitted from the legislative pay plan in 2023 SB 25. This adjustment would achieve the intended effect of the pay plan and does not represent a substantive change from the salary adjustments approved by the 23 legislature. The governor concurs with the agency's requested expenditure limitation for fiscal year '25. However, the governor recommends the addition of .5 FTE position to convert a part-time position to a full-time to assist with the agency's licensing responsibilities, which have expanded in recent years. The governor recommends decreasing the agency's contracted labor budget by $25,000 for fiscal year '25 and increasing the salary and wages budget by the same amount. This results in no change to the expenditure limit when compared with the agency's request for fiscal year 2025. The Budget Committee concurred with the governor's recommendation for fiscal year 2025 with the following notation: to encourage the BSRB to consider utilizing their ending balance to reduce licensure fees and report their plan back to the higher education budget by February 29th. Mr. Chair, I'll stand for questions on fiscal year '25.
All right, thank you, Chairman Howe. Any questions? Representative Hoffman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Howe, on page 5, it does show their fee fund expenditures, and maybe you guys have looked into this more than just my quick glance at it, but it does appear that their fee fund balance is coming down fairly quick, and they're spending more than what they're bringing in. So what was the rationale on them looking at their fees?
Chairman Howe.
I believe the committee's concern was just the overall amount in the fee fund and just a concern for the cost of the current fees. I will note that the BSRB did reduce the temporary license fees, so they've made some progress in doing that. I believe there's also some concern maybe by the agency entering into multi-state compacts with a certain number of licensees that are out of state, and so there's going to be decreased revenue from those types of things as well.
Representative Hoffman.
Okay, so your, that's fine. Your recommendation was, it sounded like for them to decrease, that they needed to look at decreasing fees, and which I'm great with if they can decrease fees. I'm just looking at their balance, and, you know, I know we kind of looked in my committee, we looked at anywhere from 75% of the year to one year's worth of balance in a fee fund seems to be a fairly good amount, which they are setting at about right now. So I'm just wondering what I don't want us to tell them that they need to decrease their fees and then they have to come to us in another couple of years. So I'm just asking the question.
Chairman Howe.
It was just some concern from some of the members, you know, are we at a healthy balance? And so they're going to get some additional information back to us. They are scheduled to meet this Monday, February 12th, I believe, and they're going to discuss these things a little bit, and so we'll take that into account. So.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Woodard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I made the motion for the notation, kind of as a notation instead of a proviso. There were some members that were interested in directing the agency to use half of their ending balance to refund that over a period of years, and so I believed that the BSRB was working with us in good faith, and so this was just having them discuss it and come back and report back to the committee. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Sutton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is really just curiosity more than anything else. I don't recall anything that would have caused their an increase in licensing. That's something that was shown in the governor's recommendation for increasing the FTE from part-time to full-time because of an uptick in their licensing. And I look at the licensing expenditures, and there is a little bump from 22 to 23. Otherwise, it's remained pretty constant. What's going on with the licensing that warrants these changes, or that might be reflective of what we're seeing in the graph?
Chairman Howe.
I do know there's 2 new FTE positions that was approved for fiscal year '23, and those were approved following the passage of Senate substitute for Senate Bill 131, which modified licensure requirements, adding new temporary licensure categories and established procedures or requirements for an expedited application process for several of the BSRB licensed professions.
Representative Sutton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. All right, so the expedited ones, I'm not sure I'm seeing, now there were the temporary license addition, and I can see how that could have had some impact. I'm not sure how the expedited ones would necessarily have an impact on staffing.
Chairman Howe.
Yes, thank you for the question. The bill required the agency to process the licenses in a more expedited fashion, so that, I guess, was a little bit of a constraint on
Put more folks on the job.
on
I gotcha.
workforce. But I will note that in July of 2015, there was 12,152 licenses issued by the agency. In January of this year, it's up to 15,453. So there are additional, ballpark of 3,000.
About a 25% increase there. That's pretty significant.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any further questions for Chairman Howe in regards to fiscal year 2025? Representative Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And by the way, I'm happy today, Representative Ballard. I think, and I serve on this committee as well. And I think just for the committee, I think we need to take a broad look at all these fee-funded agencies. And either as we as Appropriations Committee or have some sort of a base as far as what do we as Appropriations want? Do we want to keep a year balance, year and a half, a percentage, or what? Because we're kind of all over the board. We're not experts. We try, but many of us, the primary budget has very little to do with some of these, especially these fee-funded ones. And so I think if we had guidelines, then that might help all of us instead of, well, maybe we don't like a particular agency or don't understand why, why do you have to pay to be a barber? I mean, or whatever that is. And so I just want to bring up to committee, Mr. Chairman, as I think it would behoove all of us to have a broader look or a guidance when we do these. This might help some of the, some of the minutia we get into with fee-funded agencies. It's one thing, to go after, appropriated dollars, but for fee-funded, I think sometimes we need to be very careful. Those fee funds have been used for other measures in years past, and, that may be needed to fill budget holes. So we just need to make sure we understand the unintended consequences, notwithstanding to make those fees very competitive. But Mr. Chairman, thank you for indulging me to kind of, as we look at all these, to maybe look at that broader picture. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any further questions or comments in regards to fiscal year 2025? Representative Ballard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, sir, I'm so glad Representative Rogers is in a good mood today.
Any further questions for Chairman Howe? Seeing none, Chairman Howe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that the committee adopt the fiscal year 24 and 25 budget recommendation for the BSRB.
For 24 and 25?
For 24 and 25, yes.
All right, committee, you've heard the motion, seconded by Representative Woodard. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Chairman Howe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We'll move to the Kansas State Board of Healing Arts. The agency requests $7.3 million, all from special revenue funds and expenditures, and 67 FTE positions in fiscal year 2024. This is the same amount, or this is the same as the amount approved by the 2023 legislature. However, there are changes to the expenditure categories. The revised estimate includes an increase of $37,894, or 0.7% in salaries and wages, largely due to increased expenditures for employee pay and employer contributions to Social Security. The increase is partially offset by a decrease of $32,269, or 1.8%, in contractual services for computer programming services and decreased expenditures for office supplies. The governor concurs with the agency's request for fiscal year '24, and the House budget, or the Budget Committee concurs with the governor's recommendation in fiscal year 2024. Mr. Chair, I'll stand for questions.
All right, committee, are there any questions in regards to fiscal year 2024? Representative Sutton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I mentioned this question to you yesterday because I knew we were going to be discussing this. Did you happen to find out whether or not the licensing increase that was proposed over the summer and rather strongly panned by the Joint Committee on Rules and Regulations ever were put into place?
Chairman Howe.
Thank you, Representative. Let me check just a minute just to verify. I believe they did have a modest increase of $30 for renewals for the MDs and osteopath licenses.
Representative Sutton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd probably call the committee's attention to the fee fund for the Board of Healing Arts. It's cool that we just had this discussion on another one, and here we are. It's gone from 3.9 million in 21 balance, operating balance, to 6.6 million in the recommended 25. So what was the reason for raising those fees again? I'm not seeing it. I think it would probably be very appropriate to perhaps change the caps on their fees legislatively, since they don't seem to be particularly concerned about their license holders.
Chairman Howe.
I did get some additional information. So since 2019, the number of new licensees has increased by almost 1,400, and that's MDs and DOs only. And since 2017, the agency has added acupuncturists, certified nurse midwives, the Interstate Medical Licensure Compact, HB 2066 responsibilities, the telemedicine waiver, the emergency temporary license, resident active, reentry active, and sports waivers. All these have added additional timelines, duties, and requirements for the licensing analyst. And so they had requested additional staff to help with that.
Representative Sutton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we've added, I counted, it sounded like about 9 different licenses, all paying. And so, eventually you would think that when you have more and more people being licensed, you would have some economy of scale. Instead, what I'm seeing is a rapidly growing fee fund balance.
Chairman Howe.
Thank you, Representative. Thank you, Mr. Chair. We dug into it a little bit more about their fee fund, and the latest number we got was they have 1.9 million that is unencumbered.
Okay. Interesting, if I could continue.
Representative Sutton.
Thank you. I would love to get some more information on the encumbered versus unencumbered and what exactly we're counting as an encumbrance.
Chairman Howe.
So I do know the agency is party to several lawsuits, and they have close to $250,000 encumbered for the cost of those cases. But that's not the whole.
Yeah, now we're down to 6.65 million.
Sorry, did you have a question?
Representative Sutton.
I think I'll probably be making some recommendations when we get to that point on this budget. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Williams.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So one of the recommendations for 2025 that your committee concurred on was the FTE position. And so my question is, if we go back to 2023, we had 56 positions. We added 11 in 2024. And then if we piggyback on the comments from page 5 from the representative from Johnson County, we've increased both expenditures and revenues by 25% since 2021. Remind us why we added 11 positions in 1 year, and then now we're adding another one as we kind of square that with the comments on the ending balance.
Do you want to hold that question until we get to 2025? We're only on 2024.
Well, that's what I thought. He told me. Thank you.
Chairman Howell, wait on that question until we get to 2025 because that question is actually specifically in regards to the position in 2025. Any other questions on 2024? Representative Estes.
Thank you. I'm looking for their travel, and because last year it was spelled out in their budget, and I wanted to monitor for that this year, and I don't see it. Have you been watching their travel? Is it staying steady, going up, going down?
Chairman Howell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I believe the request includes $1,000 for the board's hospitality fund. Is that what you're referring to, or a separate line item?
Representative Estes.
Specifically travel.
Chairman Howell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative, the agency did not request any additional enhancements or additional funding for the travel. I know that came up last year, but no request was made for this year.
Thank you.
Any further questions in regards to 2024? All right, seeing none, and we move on to 2025.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The agency requests $7.4 million, all from special revenue funds and expenditures, and 68 FTE positions for fiscal year 2025. This is an increase of $200,041, or 2.8% above the agency's fiscal year 2025 approved amount. The increase is entirely due to the agency's enhancement request to fund the state employee pay plan in fiscal year 2025 that was approved by the 2023 legislature. The agency's revised request includes 68 FTE positions, which is an increase of 1 FTE position above the 2025 approved number. This position will be an administrative specialist in the licensing program. The governor concurs with the agency's request for fiscal year 2025, and the Budget Committee concurs with the governor's recommendation for fiscal year 2025. Mr. Chair, I'll stand for questions on fiscal year 25.
All right, Representative Williams, now your question.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Okay, so I'm going to actually rephrase that because as we look at 2025, and for example, on page 4, it says the board is able to process licenses and registration applications online, which is great, which we've been doing that for a while. But when I think about adding new positions, I would think, well, we're trying to expedite our services. There's less paper to deal with. It should actually reduce costs, but I'm not seeing that. And then in order to understand the increase in 11 FTEs and now another request for an increase in another FTE, which does materialize in additional expenditures from the fee fund. My question is, what's the difference in number of licenses that we've issued from the increase in 2023 to present day? Because if we're getting a lot new licenses, then maybe there's a justification.
Chairman Howell.
I'll take a crack at it real quick. So they licensed over 34,000 healthcare professionals in the state. And in fiscal year 2023, the board issued almost 4,000 new licenses, with the majority being issued within 10 days of final review.
Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. But does that tell us, is that 34,000 present day compared to what in 2023?
Chairman Howe.
You're asking what the increase in total licenses between fiscal years? Okay.
23 to 25.
Chairman Howe.
Okay. Fiscal year 2023 actuals is 3,922. They're projecting fiscal year 2025, 4,324.
Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So are you saying that's 3,922 new licenses, really renewed, or kind of help us understand, is that 34,000 that have to be renewed annually or not necessarily annually? So are you saying that the 3,922 is an increase, or what are you trying to describe between 3,922 and 4,324?
Chairman Howe.
Those numbers I gave you were new licenses, and I will note that in the initial, for a new license, they don't have the apparatus set up yet to process those online. They can only do the renewals online. So that's something they're working through with software and some other administrative challenges to get that up and going. So that's one of the agency's directives moving forward, is getting that piece put in place.
Representative Williams.
Okay, I'll try to be brief on this. So you're telling me that if I am applying for a new license for a physical therapist, I'm brand new out of college, I'm applying for my license, I can't do that online?
Chairman Howe.
That is my understanding, that the initial license you can't do online. It's only the renewals currently, but they're working towards getting that done.
Well, then on my only last comment, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Williams.
Thank you. My only last comment is that it is interesting that we increased 11 FTEs from 23 to 24, and we didn't have a substantial new license, and now we're increasing one more. So it doesn't really seem to make sense to me. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Sutton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We had a pretty lengthy discussion regarding this in the Joint Committee on Rules and Regs. And as we all know, Rules and Regs has no teeth. You know, we can recommend or not recommend, and it makes no difference to the agency. And we see that reflected right here. The committee said, why are you increasing your fees? Your fee fund balance is strong and getting stronger. And the agency then went on and, you know, left the meeting, raised the fees, and didn't worry about it. Now, fortunately, by happenstance, I also serve here, where we do have teeth. And so, and I'm going to ask the chair's guidance on this one, or perhaps staff, which would be, I see a 17% growth year over year in their fee fund balance. Because I'm a softie deep down inside, I only want to reduce it, their fee funds, or their licensing fees by 15% across the board. Now, would you prefer to do, would the chair prefer to do that as a proviso, if that's possible, or would you like me to submit legislation to do exactly that?
I would probably suggest that you do a proviso.
Okay.
In the budget, when we're working the mega budget.
All right, very good. If I could get somebody to set a timer for me on that one, so that at the, I'll try to remember it. I probably will. I generally remember, but I want to make sure that I get that in there when we do it. In fact, if we could make a note on this budget, I think that would be appropriate.
All right. Any further discussion in regards to 2025? Representative Owens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I still go back to the concern that Representative Williams brought up about the continued growth in FTEs. We had significant increases in FTEs in previous years. And so maybe I missed the full justification of why we need one more after the addition over the last years. If I missed that, could you rehash that justification for another FTE this year?
Chairman Howe.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. and Thank you, Representative, for the question. So some of these additional requirements have been because of things that the legislature has enacted. The position we're specifically talking about, a licensing analyst, it's an administrative position. It probably starts around $16.34 an hour. So we're not talking about a whole lot of their fee funds going towards that. So, but yeah, I mean, just trying to process everything in a timely way, that 10-day window that they're trying to do, and they're trying to meet all the obligations within their healthcare professions.
Excuse me.
I do know there's some other, I think some additional compacts maybe coming down the pipeline in terms of like physical therapy and things like that. So if you have multi-state licenses, you may lose revenue because now those licensees can, perhaps if they live on the Kansas City, Missouri side, you know, they can pay Missouri, but they can work in Kansas. And so they wouldn't necessarily, I don't think, pay some of those fees in Kansas because of the reciprocity or the multi-state license. So,
Representative Owens.
So have they been able to manage the increases thus far with their current staff? And the follow-up to that is, anything coming down the pike per se, are we referring to legislation that is introduced that we anticipate passing, or something that is more absolutely going to happen?
Chairman Howe.
I can't comment or speculate on the future legislation. I'm just aware that there are conversations and perhaps there is legislation in a committee I'm unaware of. I do know they have 7 vacancies currently at the within the board or the agency. And so that's always a challenge is finding, you know, people for the pay that's being offered. So they're like a number of agencies. They're absorbing the pay plan within their existing fees. And so those are some things other state agencies aren't afforded that, so.
Representative Owens.
Yeah, thank you for making that clarification, because that would have been my next question. Are there any vacancies? And since we already have 7 vacancies that they're struggling to fill, I don't think that it makes sense to add another vacancy for them to fill at this time. And so I'm going to make a motion that we remove the 1 additional FTE and associated funding.
All right, committee, you've heard the motion. It's been seconded by Representative Estes. Discussion on the motion. Seeing none, Representative Owens, you may close.
I close.
All right, committee, you've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes appear to have it. Ayes do have it. Motion passes. We're back on the budget. Representative Landwehr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I'm trying to understand why you have a concern on the multi-state compacts, which we have, I think, several of them within the Board of Healing Arts. We have, I believe, 8. We're working on number 9 and 10 this year because there are fees charged for that.
Chairman Howe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's my understanding that can reduce revenue to the agency in future years for multi-state licenses. But if I'm misinformed, I'd be glad to learn more information about that.
Any further discussion in regards to fiscal year 2025? Representative Hoffman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And we go back to, you said that they don't have the ability to do new licenses, only renewal license with their current software. Do they have a platform that they're using internally that they're building? Because they are not one of them that has joined in with OITS to use the master licensing software, which would alleviate some of the issues that they're having with licensing. So,
Chairman Howe.
Thank you for the question, Vice Chair Hoffman. Yeah, you're correct. It's my understanding that the initial application isn't able to be processed. I don't believe they're using the OTIS.
Well, they're not using OITS, and what I'm saying is that they need to be looking at it. There's actually money in the governor's budget this year to move agencies over to the solution. So, but some agencies, this may be one of them, I don't know, but some agencies have been very reluctant to go that direction, and I just would encourage them to go that direction.
Chairman Howell.
I do believe, I don't have exactly which agency, but I do know they work with some other agencies, maybe providing some of that administrative or software support. So,
Representative Hoffman.
Yeah, they do. I mean, the Behavior Science Regulatory Board is one of them that's using it, and some of the other, that's the one we just did. But I'm just saying that the Board of Healing Arts, if their current software can't do what it needs to do, they need to be looking to OITS, certainly not looking at going out on their own and trying to fix this. That's what OITS is for, and they've got a solution that would be cheaper than them going out on their own.
Chairman Howell.
thank you. Point is taken for my committee to work with them on that. The two lawsuits, I just thought it'd be good for the committee to know. One is Health of Planned Parenthood, Great Plains versus Kobach, and then the other one is, and that was regarding the Women's Right to Know Act, HB 2264. The other lawsuit is Trust Women versus Bennett. So those are the two current lawsuits pending before the agency.
Representative Landwehr.
Okay, I guess I'm trying to understand what you're trying to tell us on the impact on this budget with those lawsuits that is with the AG.
Chairman Howell.
I had referred to earlier that the agency had encumbered $250,000 for those cases. So I just wanted for the committee to be aware what those cases were. Yep.
Representative Landwehr.
So is the Board of Healing Arts having to provide information to the Attorney General? Is that why they're encumbering an expense?
Chairman Howell.
I don't understand the exact financial obligation to the Board of Healing Arts at this point, but I do know they have to pay for some expert witnesses and things like that for people offering testimony.
Representative Landwehr.
I don't know if I can take it any further than this. I think it's information that we should have, because I'm just trying to understand how that impacts it. Because with all the different lawsuits that we've had over the years in my tenure, I don't recall, it could have been, where an agency was bearing part of the expense for something. So I think we'd like to get that information. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman Howell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I probably should have said that on the first go-around, but I do know that the executive director, Board of Healing Arts, is actually named specifically in one of the lawsuits in her official capacity.
Any further discussion in regards to fiscal year 2025? Seeing none, Chairman Howell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move the committee adopt the fiscal year 24 and fiscal year 25 as amended budget recommendation for the Kansas State Board of Healing Arts.
All right, committee, you've heard the motion, seconded by Representative Woodard. All those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Chairman Howell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Committee, we will go to the State Historical Society next. The agency submitted a revised estimate of $9.1 million, including $5 million SGF in expenditures and 77.5 FTEs in fiscal year 24. The revised estimate is an all funds increase of $222,053, or 2.5%, and an SGF increase of $378,394, or 7.5% above the fiscal year 24 amount. This increase is mainly due to the capital improvement supplemental request of $790,000, including $725,000 SGF, which is an increase of $350,000, all SGF, or 79.5% above the fiscal year 24 amount, approved amount. This increase is due to a supplemental request for the Shawnee Indian Mission roof replacement, which was originally scheduled for fiscal years 25, 26, and 27. The agency indicates recent storm damage and public scrutiny have accelerated the need for replacement. The governor concurs with the agency's fiscal year 24 revised estimate and recommends $9.1 million, including $5.4 million SGF in expenditures and 77.5 FTE positions in fiscal year 24. The Joint Committee on State Building Construction also recommended concurring with the governor's budget recommendation for fiscal year 24. The Higher Ed Budget Committee concurs with the governor recommendation in fiscal year 24. Mr. Chair, I'll stand for questions.
All right, committee, any questions in regards to fiscal year 2024? Representative Sutton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No questions with the numbers here whatsoever, but something you said did kind of perk my ears up a little bit. Public scrutiny? What are we talking about here?
Chairman Howe.
Yeah, thank you. The Shawnee Mission Historic Site has received scrutiny for perhaps the condition of certain facilities at that site. I'm not sure if all of those are legitimate concerns or not, but there is an attempt by an out-of-state Indian tribe to acquire that property. And so there is pending legislation in the House, or at least there's been a hearing about that particular topic, and it's very controversial.
Representative Sutton.
I find that interesting. It sounds, correct me if I'm wrong here. I'm trying to kind of put together what you said. What it sounds like is someone else was interested in the property, which called attention to the fact that we hadn't been taking care of it as a state. Is that, am I understanding that correctly?
Chairman Howe.
I think that's the perhaps allegation or concern by some other interested parties in that property. I'm not going to say that's 100% correct. I think there's some disagreement on some of those items.
I think the roofing timeline change might substantiate that view. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Curtis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On page 3, I would just, something that caught my attention, the aid to local units. Could you tell me what that, is that for a specific project, or is that something that's like a grant funded thing that people can apply for? Thank you.
I'm sorry, I heard page 3, I didn't.
Yeah.
Which project?
Page 3, aid to local units. It just caught my attention. I was just curious as to, is that for a specific project, or is that like a grant, pool of money that they can apply for different grant projects?
Chairman Howe.
Let me check on that just a minute. Thank you for your patience. Yeah, the Humanities Kansas, they use state funds to support Kansas communities, so that's one. And then the Community Resource Assistant Grants. So I think that's what those two are from. Yeah.
Representative Owens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to take a moment, if we could, and bask in the beauty that is a reduction in FTEs from year to year. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any further questions in regards to fiscal year 2024? Seeing none, Chairman Howe, you may move on to fiscal year 2025.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The agency requests $10 million, including $7 million SGF in expenditures and 74.5 FTE positions for fiscal year 25. This is an all funds increase of $836,949 or 9.2%, an SGF increase of $1.6 million or 29.1% above the fiscal year 24 revised amount. The agency's fiscal year 25 request includes capital improvement expenditures of $2.4 million, including $2.3 million SGF, which is an all funds increase of $1.6 million, or 199.5%, and an SGF increase of $1.6 million, or 214.7% above the fiscal year 24 revised amount. The capital improvements increase is due to the agency's enhancement request to replace and refurbish air handling units in the Kansas Museum of History. According to the agency, the current units have been in place since 1984 and have reached their service limit. There are also decreases in the agency's request for contractual services, aid to locals, and other assistance, and an increase in salaries and wages for fiscal year 2025. The decrease for contractual services mainly due to decreases in repair and servicing and other contractual services. The decrease in aid to locals and other assistance are both due to anticipated reductions in federal aid in those areas. The increase in salaries and wages is due to an increase in group health benefits and anticipating hiring to fill vacant FTE positions. The governor recommends $10.8 million, including $7.8 million SGF in expenditures and 74.5 FTE positions for fiscal year 25. This is an increase of $853,743 SGF, or 12.2% above the agency's request for fiscal year 25. The increase is to include a chiller replacement in the Kansas Museum of History in the agency's enhancement request, as it was not included in the agency's initial request for fiscal year 2025. The Joint Committee on State Building Construction recommended concurring with the governor's recommendation for fiscal year 25, and the Budget Committee also concurred with the governor's recommendation for fiscal year 2025. Mr. Chair, I'll stand for questions.
Committee, any questions in regards to fiscal year 2025? Seeing none, Chairman Howe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move the approval of the State Historical Society fiscal year 24 and fiscal year 2025 recommendation.
All right, committee, you've heard the motion, seconded by Representative Woodard. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Chairman Howe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Going to the State Library. The agency requests a revised estimate of $6.2 million, including $4.1 million SGF in expenditures and 29.5 FTE positions in fiscal year 24. This is an all funds increase of $113,881, or 1.9%, including an SGF increase of $13,810, or 3.1% above the fiscal year 24 approved amount. The SGF increase is due to the agency's supplemental request to account for a shortfall in appropriations for the legislative pay plan. The all funds increase is mainly due to increases in contractual services of $127,049, or 4.5%, an increase in capital outlay of $25,785, or 41.8%, partially offset by a decrease in commodities of $53,000, or 67.2%. The contractual services increase is primarily due to the agency's decision to continue a Tumble Book Library subscription, all federal funding. And Tumble Book Library is an online database of children's ebooks for grades kindergarten through sixth grade, including animated, talking picture books, read-aloud chapter books, graphic novels, nonfiction books and videos, and books in Spanish and French. The decrease in commodities is mostly due to decreases in other professional, scientific supplies and materials. The increase in capital outlay is mostly due to increases in book and library material and non-capital office equipment. The governor concurs with the agency's fiscal year 24 revised estimate and recommends $6.2 million, including $4.1 million SGF in expenditures and 29.5 FTE positions in fiscal year 24. The Budget Committee concurs with the governor's recommendation in fiscal year 2024. Mr. Chairman, I'll stand for questions.
All right, committee, any questions in regards to fiscal year 2024? Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm just curious if your committee had any questions about the American Library Association, about the safety of the access of children for the Tumble Book Library, any concerns? And in addition, do we know, just from the state library's perspective, we know that there are library boards and budgets across our state. Do we know how much they spend for, or their financial payments to the American Library Association, maybe in dues or activities?
Chairman Howe.
Mr. Chairman, I do not have the answer to that question, but I can look for that to see that. I know after we had our budget recommendations, I did have a member approach me on the floor asking about the American Library Association and had some additional questions, so.
Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would appreciate that. We've seen states such as Texas, Florida, Alabama, Montana sever their ties because of some of the explicit content that is being actually like advertised through the American Library Association. So just concerned that we would continue to fund an organization that might be problematic for our children. Thank you.
Any further questions in regards to fiscal year 2024? All right, seeing none. Go. Representative Corbett.
Thank you, Chairman. One of the questions I might have on the Tumble Book Library subscription, is there any idea how much activity it's actually getting or how many people are using it?
Chairman Howe.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, I do not have that exact number right available to me, but I can get that to you.
That's perfect.
Mr. Chairman, can I answer the previous question?
Chairman Howe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative, the dues were $800 for membership for the state library for the ALA.
Any further questions in regards to fiscal year 2024? All right, now seeing none. Chairman Howe, you may move on to fiscal year 2025.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The agency requests $9.7 million, including $7.6 million SGF in expenditures and 29.5 FTE positions for fiscal year 25. This is an all funds increase of $3.5 million or 56.3%, including an SGF increase of $3.4 million or 82.5% above the fiscal year 24 revised estimate. The increase is mainly due to the agency's enhancement request for state grants and aid to libraries. According to the agency, the current appropriation for state grants and aid to libraries has remained stagnant at $1.1 million SGF for several years. The two enhancements combined are an increase of $3.3 million SGF or 311.6% for a total of $4.4 million SGF for the state grants and aid to libraries in fiscal year 2025. The agency request also includes enhancement request to increase the state courier subsidy, continue the blind information access program contract, and hire a part-time temporary unclassified audio production assistant position. The governor recommends $9.6 million, including $7.5 million SGF for fiscal year 25. This is a decrease of $91,226, all SGF, or 0.9% below the agency's request. The governor's recommendation does not include the agency's enhancement request for a part-time unclassified audio production assistant position and to subsidize the cost of the Kansas Library Express courier service for interlibrary loans. The Budget Committee concurs with the governor's recommendation for fiscal year 25 with the following adjustments. Number one, delete 1.5 million SGF to not adopt the agency's enhancement to set a base amount of $3,000 for libraries in the state grants and aid to libraries for fiscal year 2025. This funding would have been distributed to public libraries throughout the state. Number two, delete 1.9 million SGF to not adopt the agency's enhancement request to increase the formula allocation for state grants and aid to libraries from 28 cents per capita for local libraries to 67 cents per capita for local libraries for fiscal year 2025. Mr. Chairman, I'll stand for questions.
All right, committee questions in regards to fiscal year 2025. Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I actually really like those two amendments because as I was looking at 2023, we started with $4 million SGF, and we've jumped to $7 million with the governor's recommendation. That's an 86% increase in just those few years, those 3 years. And so I appreciate the fact that that the committee recommended to strip those two items that are all SGF, which I would also note that locally there's taxing authority for all of our individual libraries. If they want to expand their programs, they can do so locally rather than have the state do it. My question to you related to this, is there an increase in usage over the last 3 years at our state library? Do we have anything that kind of gives us an idea of how many people are actually utilizing the space, both in the building, but also maybe online? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman Howell.
Which page is that?
Page 2.
Oh, okay.
It's hard to.
Okay, so on page 2 of the BA, it said they provided assistance to 324 central libraries and 44 branch libraries across the state. The agency states there were 8.5 million visits to public libraries in fiscal year 2023, with a print circulation of 16.4 million items checked out by adults and children. Additionally, Kansas Public Libraries provided 3,681 public computers with internet access in fiscal year 23, which were used over 1 million times. So those are just some examples. Additionally, the state library offers some additional services. And in fiscal year 2023, the agency staff answered nearly 3,000 constituent questions and responded to 434 requests for legislator contact information and trying to provide that service for the legislature. So,
any further questions in regards to fiscal year 2025? All right, seeing none, Chairman Howell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just if I could comment quickly about that change in state aid and grants to libraries. The committee felt they needed to authorize the change in statute first before asking for the money. So the committee felt like they were getting kind of the cart before the horse. So if they have a proposal, that's something a committee could hear, so we could authorize any changes before making an appropriation. So, thank you. Mr. Chairman, I move that the committee approve the budget recommendation for the state library for fiscal years 2024 and fiscal year 2025.
All right, committee, you've heard the motion, seconded by Representative Woodard. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes appear to have it. Ayes do have it. Motion passes. All right, thank you, Chairman Howell. Now we're going to move on to Chairperson Williams with the K through 12 education budget. And could you please start with the Kansas State School for the Deaf?
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman. Committee, if you will take out your documents and your budget for the School for the Deaf, I will begin. I want to graciously thank Superintendent Luann Barron, and quickly, I'll just teach you 2 things she taught us. First, That's hello. All right. Next. That is nice to meet you. So we want to thank her for coming to our committee and doing a fantastic job. They have been around for 163 years of operating and helping students with and people of Kansas that are deaf. They have 32 teachers on site and 10 outreach instructors for the language assessment program. By the way, I'm just giving you a briefing. You don't have to find anything at this moment. They do serve approximately 150 students on campus. And remember what I told you last year, that many of those football signals and signs might have, well, they believe that they originated at this location in Olathe. Of course, they do provide services to over 130 different school districts to students or individuals between birth to 21 years of age. Now, if you turn to page 7 in your budget little review, I want to kind of look at the summary page that you will find on page 7. Actually, mine's not page 7. Okay, so in 2023, the legislature approved $11.48 million and $15.392 all funds. The agency recommendations, if you will know, have actually gone up to $16.2 million. And you can look at this to kind of see what were those agency changes. Just remember, when you're looking at agency changes, those are usually no limit funds and require no action by the legislature. So sometimes it's a transfer or movement or shift of money that hasn't been expended, or they are additional monies from fee funds. And so there's nothing that the legislative body can or shall do on those areas. Those increases are just moved forward. The governor recommends $17.3 million, including $11.2 million SGF. And the breakdown, you can see it on page 7. And a couple items you'll know at the bottom of the governor's recommendation for this budget is the use of expedited use of ARPA funds to finish that HVAC project, as well as some IT infrastructure that they added. And so that was kind of the major change. There are also some other changes, some technical changes to this particular budget, and such as emergency tunnel repair. It was collapsing. And then also an elevator repair, but we're going to talk more about that elevator repair in the 2025 budget, because I think it's really an important discussion. So those are some of the changes for 2024. If there aren't any questions, I can move on to 2025.
Committee, any questions? Seeing none, we move on to fiscal year 2025.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Moving on to 2025, if you look at page 10, 10 is kind of the page that I'm going to be working off of, and that is the summary of the budget. That way you can get a clear glance of the agency requests, the governor's recommendations, and those totals on there. So the agency requests the $17.3 million all funds, including the $11.6 million SGF. And you can, of course, see those outlined because we're gonna pause to talk about those. Notice a few things in here. I'm gonna definitely talk about the positions, the FTE increases that were requested, because I know that is an important issue for this committee. But I'm also going to pause on an item. If you look at page 13, look at page 13, and before you look at page 13, I believe if you look at page 12, you'll see this supplemental enhancement request sheet. And then I want you to look at the 2025 enhancements, and I want you to look at all those different enhancements. But then I want you to look at number 9, required elevator upgrades, $307,000. And then if you turn to page 13, you can look at item number 15, which is the required elevator upgrade. So I wanted to call your attention to that because every time we pass a bill, there are financial consequences to the passages of those bills. And we did have an elevator bill last year. And so what's happening here is they have 6 different elevators. And because of that passage of that bill, they have to move the electronics in the elevator so it's further away from another piece of equipment that's inside it. And so that, for this particular one agency, out of how many agencies do we have, there's that $300,000 increase. There may be some conversation related to that, but I also wanted to go ahead and talk about the cybersecurity IT position and the consultant. So if you look at the governor's recommendation, she recommended to actually go ahead and fund both of those positions. So let's first talk about that IT position. Cybersecurity, that is also a big topic that we have all been discussing. But there's also a bill moving through on the House side, I do not know about the Senate side, that there is a cybersecurity office, a cybersecurity overall kind of solution, rather than look at every single individual organization, school, or entity having their own cybersecurity specialist. Because this school, with their students, is requesting, and it has been approved by the governor, this cybersecurity position of $120,000. You will hear in a few minutes another school, if we have time, that also is requesting $120,000 for a cybersecurity specialist. In addition to that, they've requested a cybersecurity IT consultant. Now, that is not an FTE because it's a consultant. There are times within the 2 budgets that we're going to talk about where contracted services are replacing FTEs. It still has a cost, but you don't have some of the additional costs that you might for the benefits. So with that, they were counseled by OITS for the consultant. OITS, who, if you go online and you look at what they're supposed to provide, they're supposed to be the overarching umbrella organization for our agencies and our state employees, where they provide technical service, professional services, informational services, security service information. But yet, it is our understanding that they recommended to the agency that they hire a consultant to do this for cybersecurity, that they would be shared. And so we have an expert in the room that might be able to say, is that good? Is that not? Are we off? Is that particular entity, OITS, offloading responsibility, or can they just not, they're maxed out and they can't handle that? So that's a question I really can't answer. But what we did is we recommended, the committee recommended, for all of the governor's recommendations, because most of the capital improvements you'll find in this budget are state institution. They're not SGF. So those go through SIBF. So good, those are great. ARPA funds, good. We support that. For the other increases, there are some that the governor included as an enhancements. We approve of those. The 2 that we put pause on, and I would definitely like this committee to make comment on, would be those 2 positions. The recommendation from our committee was, number 1, let's go ahead and fund, we're leaving in place that IT cybersecurity consultant. The reason, but we want it reviewed. The reason we didn't remove it is because OITS recommended it. So if OITS recommended it, do they not have the capacity? So we left it there with the notation to the committee. We get it's 1 FTE. What do you guys think about that? The next one, we actually did remove to omnibus, and that's the cybersecurity IT position. We moved it to omnibus, and we said we would like to know if there is ultimately a solution. If there's not a solution, then we would recommend that we fund it. My concern, Mr. Chairman, is perhaps the rapid rate in which we finalize. Maybe we will, maybe we won't. What if we don't have an omnibus? Is there a way that the recommendation, if this committee so chose, I'm not making the motion, that we would fund the cybersecurity in the event there is not a more holistic solution by omnibus of this year? So I'm going to stand for questions and just let those thoughts simmer.
Representative Hoffman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And yeah, if you remember last year, we gave several positions and money to OITS to do cybersecurity in the agencies. Now, I haven't talked to him about this particular one, and so it's a conversation we'll have about it. But I will say, Representative or Chairman Williams, it appears to me that the governor did not recommend the IT consultant in 25.
Actually,
Chairman
okay,
Williams.
so I need to clarify for that. That is in the School for the Deaf. She did include it, but it's shared position, so it's in the School for the Blind. So I shouldn't have even really mentioned that, but since that maybe tomorrow we don't get to it, I did kind of explain that. So it is included, but just not in this budget.
Okay.
So it's worthy of the discussion, but maybe not at this time.
Right. So because they're a shared campus, then
Yes.
in the
It's on a shared campus.
in the School of the Blind or
They share services.
shared services. Okay. The School of the Blind is the one where the
Yes.
consultant is. Okay. Well, the only thing I would say is possibly if you're concerned about having that looked at, we can always change that recommendation to say before finalization of the budget and not review it omnibus. And that way we would look at it before, if that's what you're concerned about.
Chairman
Thank
Williams.
you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And maybe if there's anybody else on our committee that wants to speak to that, looks like Representative Massa, but I would like protection for them. Cybersecurity is especially important for all of our agencies for privacy reasons, but this agency, as well as the other Kansas State School for the Blind, they have a lot of technology. So that assists them with their maneuvering, with the hearing and sight. And I would hate for any of those types of disruptions to occur and impede their ability to communicate and to have access. So that's great if that.
Representative Tarwater.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to talk about this number 9, required elevator upgrades. We passed that bill a couple of years ago for elevator inspectors and inspections. We still haven't. I sit on that safety board to help come up with the rules and regulations on that. There's been a lot of discussion, a lot of confusion actually in that committee or council about having to bring elevators up to today's codes, and that we have a statute against that. And we are not to require businesses to upgrade their elevators to today's code. It would just be too expensive. And you're seeing it right here, $307,000 to bring an elevator up to code. That's not the intent of that bill. That's not the intent of the rules and regs. However, there are some members of that committee that would like that. It's just not legal. Furthermore, the fire marshal has been, the past and present fire marshal has been really good about giving variances because these things are really expensive to work on. And actually, they're adding an engineer to their staff that we'll discuss later in a different budget, but they're adding an engineer to kind of overview this stuff. There's a lot of confusion. So I'd like to strike number 9 and remove $307,000, and I'll bring a proviso at the omnibus to exempt them or give them a variance on that.
So are you making a motion now, or are you going to bring that when we?
I'm going to make a motion to strike it now.
All right.
And then.
Committee, you've heard the motion, seconded by Representative Hoffman. Discussion on the motion. Representative Ballard.
For 2025, are you going, okay, thank you.
Representative Ousley.
If I recall correctly, thank you, Mr. Chair, there was equipment failure that allowed water to leak upon the elevator operation system, and that's what caused the elevator to need the upgrades. The elevator was actually in disrepair. It went through the building construction committee as well, and as they were doing these repairs, the upgrades were made. So I think striking number 9 right here is doing a real disservice to the school. And maybe somebody else on the building construction committee here could chime in on that and correct me if I'm wrong.
Chairperson Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So that was in 2024, and that was provided for, those improvements. What we're talking about in 2025 is building codes only.
Representative Tarwater.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. This is a whole different item line. The first item actually needed to be done because they had to repair the elevator. This is to bring it up to today's code, which isn't the intent of the bill or the Rules and Regs Committee.
Representative Sutton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would concur with some of the thoughts here. That the other elevator was repaired, and that's fantastic, and that's the one that we dealt with in committee. We did, however, in joint construction, also deal with some of the other agencies that are having this fallout. Anytime the way that it's being implemented, and I'm not going to say that this is right, wrong. I don't know enough. I voted against this stupid bill, by the way. But, the way it's being implemented is if there are any changes made to, any upgrades to, that touch the elevator, then they have to implement all of these rules that have been put in place by the state fire marshal or whatever this task force is that the representative sits on and is just monkeying around with everything. But the problem that we're having is that they required sprinkler systems in an elevator shaft, which maybe that's good, maybe that's bad, but I know for electronics, it's bad. If there's a problem, that's going to be an issue. Sprinkler systems, and I know this one firsthand, are notorious for springing leaks. And so there doesn't even have to be a fire for water to be coming down onto your circuit panel. Great move. That's probably not the effect that we were going for when we passed that legislation. The only other, but that was, if I could, I actually did have a question, except that I lost my train of thought entirely now. Oh, there we go. One of the 1,400 press releases I've read in the last 2 weeks said something about a security officer being hired at OITS.
We're on the motion.
I'm sorry?
We're on the motion.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm very good. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Francis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to comment that I think that number 9 in this bill is just an example of what we're doing to a bunch of small businesses across the state. If you'll notice, that's $300,000 for 2 elevators, and they didn't even address 2 others for the future. So, you know, we have a relatively small agency that's having to deal with these massive increases, and we need to think about what that's doing to our businesses across the state. So I support the motion.
Any further discussion on the motion? Chairperson Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I will just note there's actually 6, so it could be, you know, you could add another 300,000 onto that. And then if you want to look at it so that you can compare the 2024 elevator improvement was 200,000. It was on page 12, I believe. And you can compare it to this 300,000. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any further discussion on the motion? Representative Owsley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I have to oppose this motion, whether I was on the proper elevator line item or not. I think that it would be important to bring our elevator for the School of the Deaf, all of them, up to code. So I think that if this is a starting point and this was recommended not only by the governor but requested by the school, I'm not going to support the motion.
Any further discussion? Representative Ballard.
I just need a clarification. Are the elevators up to code and this is something additional?
Chairperson Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this would be in response to the new code requirements, as Representative Sutton had mentioned, where you have to add sprinkler systems. So they would literally have to move electronic boxes. There's nothing wrong with the elevator electronics. It's just they have to move them now in order to comply with a new legislation that we had passed.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, Representative Tarwater, you may close on your motion.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, I don't think that was the intent of that legislation. We cannot go to every business and tell them they have to upgrade their elevators to today's code. That's simply, it's against statute. It's illegal. That'd be like coming into a building that isn't ADA compliant and have them rip out all the doorways and change the entire building structure. Now, if you have to rebuild something, then sure, yeah, you've got to bring it up to code, and that's how it works. But we can't force this on businesses. We can't force this on our institutions. Again, the fire marshal is really good about reviewing these and giving variances. They've done it. They've done several of them. They, like, as I said, they're adding a position to make sure that this kind of thing doesn't happen. And we'll talk about that in the fire budget. But, and I'll come back with most likely the fire marshal is going to give them a variance anyway, but let's go ahead and remove it for now. Thank you. I close.
All right, committee, you've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. Motion passes. Okay, Chairperson Williams, we're going to have to recess and come back to the budget, the other budget that you have for the School for the Blind, and then also Chairman Anderson will be having those tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. And so we are recessed until 9 a.m.